Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, delighted to be joined by Clint Murphy today. And Clint, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your journey and the world that you're involved in. So over to you, Clint.
Perfect. Thank you. First and foremost, father to two boys at the time we're recording this. They're 14 and a half and 11 and a half, and a husband. I've been with my wife now for coming up on 28 years. By day, I am a CFO for a real estate development company. In the evening, what I'm known for more now, and it's crazy to think this, Simon, in such a short period of time, but we're going to talk about the power of that for people in today's conversation. I am a content creator, predominantly known for my writing on Twitter. We are about to cross 300,000 followers and teammates there, and we publish a weekly podcast episode where we have conversations with authors, and also now a weekly newsletter, long-form content from some of the podcast information and what I write on Twitter. So by day, CFO, content creator by night.
Very good. I like that. There's something quite superhero about that explanation. And I want to talk to you a little bit about both areas, obviously, because as a CFO, you're in the world of numbers, you're in the world of making a living, you're in the world of making things profitable, keeping costs under control. But that marries nicely with the other work that you do. And you mentioned things like your Twitter community that you have, and your newsletter, which I know is growing. I mean, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people involved in the Growth Guide newsletter. So could you tell us more about that community, both your social media community and the newsletter? And maybe we could also add into that your podcasting.
Yeah. So the idea, Simon, and this all goes back now about 6 years ago when I had a conversation at work to figure out my future path. And where we landed was largely that I would give a certain amount of time, and we're not talking days, weeks, months, even years. I said, I've got about 10 years of this left. Being a CFO can be tiring. It can be draining. It can be hard on the family. And I said, I've got 10 years of this left. And when I'm done, I'm going to do these things, right? Podcast, public speak, coach and consult, private equity, and real estate investment. So everything I want to do hasn't changed along that timeline. The original instinct was I would never do any of it until I got closer to the end. And then COVID came. And so all of a sudden, you, me, everyone in the world, we had a bit more time because we were locked up in our homes and everything was canceled. Our children's activities, our time with our friends, our time with our family. Depending on where you lived, everyone had a different situation. Here, where I live, Vancouver, Canada, we were pretty much locked down. Rolling lockdowns, I think they called them in some parts of the world, but you understand the point, Simon. And so I launched a podcast. I like to talk to authors. I like to read books. It's how I've done most of my learning in life. And you need to promote that somewhere. The place that I found the best fit, and this is important for people when they're starting to pick, where do I want to be a social media creator? Because each platform offers a different venue and it offers a different style. And my style tends to be short, tight, punchy. Twitter's perfect for that. And started writing in August 2021. And got serious at that point. And then in April 2022, so January 2022, we had just crossed 10,000 followers. By April, we were at 20-ish. And I started writing threads, and I wrote a thread every day for about 75 days. For people who don't know what a thread is a series of tweets that take instead of being a short, pithy tweet or platitude, you're writing a bit of a short essay by combining tweets. And after writing them every day for 75 days in a row, I started to add an average of 20,000 followers per month, every month for the next 10 months. So we started the year at 10,000. We ended the year at 20,000 in 200. And in April, we were 20. And why I'm pointing that out for the community growth, Simon, is a lot of people think a few things. One, they think overnight success, or they think, wow, it happened so fast, or you built it up over a long period of time. And what I like to think about and talk about and write about is the ideas of compounding, the ideas of exponentiality and exponential thinking, because it always goes slow until it goes fast. What they're ignoring in there is I started in 2020. For 6 months, I was floundering. Then I started getting serious, took some courses. For 4 months, it took me to get to 10,000. It took me another 4 months to get the next 10,000. And then it was 20,000 a month. But in there, I wrote every single day for a year. And now we're a year and a half, and I think I've taken about 5 or 6 days off. So it's consistency, compounding, going exponential. So that's what the Twitter community. And then when you look at how it pairs up with the podcast and the newsletter, because the newsletter, you're right, we've crossed 7,000 subscribers now. We just did a pretty big cull of people who weren't opening and took out about 1,500. So that would have been an 8,500. We dropped it down to 7, and we'll clean that list up every couple months. So we're 7,000 there. The podcast is being downloaded about 13,000 times a month now. And you rewind a year and it was 400. So as the Twitter audience grew, 2 things happened. And this was all part of the plan because I looked at it as a flywheel. If we can grow on Twitter, we can reach out to people who we otherwise couldn't reach out to because we'll have an audience. And so we can sell, I'll put you in front of that audience. If we can reach out to bigger authors, we'll have more interesting things to write about. We'll grow more. We'll be able to reach out to bigger and bigger and bigger authors. It doesn't mean, I always want to be cognizant. I don't want to say that the authors I've had on already aren't great, aren't amazing. I didn't learn because I did. It's how do you grow? How do you get to that next level of best-selling author? And so as you grow on one platform, you can leverage reaching out to more people, which allows you to write better content and more content, and it just keeps repeating itself. And so the idea was to do that for 5 years and see where it goes. I always like to think, okay, if I do this for 1 to 5 years, what does it look like at the end? And as long as I heard this one on a Tim Ferriss episode and it stuck with me. If you enjoy the journey, and if you would do the journey, even if the result was 0 listens, 0 downloads, 0 follows, then it doesn't matter how many you get. The success is doing it. And so it's, okay, well, I'll do it for 1 to 5 years. And if I'm enjoying it, great. And if it ends up in results, even better. So that very long answer on those communities. Every Tuesday, we release the podcast. Every Thursday, we release the newsletter. Podcast, usually each new episode is downloaded. We're coming up on about 2,500 times in the first 90 days and looking to grow that. It's slowing down, Simon, because we've prioritized newsletter growth. And I'd love to get your take on this and talk to more people. Is I've heard that the newsletter is the longer term game because the newsletter can drive people to the podcast, but the podcast can't be leveraged as well, driving people to the newsletter. So I'm trying to pick the right balance there because the podcast growth was getting exciting, and now it's slowing down because all the growth's going to the newsletter because that's where we point them to in our socials and on the website.
Well, thank you, Clint, for explaining that, because there's quite a few interesting things there. And I do want to pick up on a couple of areas because people listening to this will go, wow, that's fantastic. That sounds incredible. I wish I could do that. And then they'll think about, well, I'll just write a thread then every day for the next month and I should be okay. But it's not just writing threads, right? It's the study, it's the long hours, it's the value that you're putting into those threads, and it's the connection and the engagement with the community. And my question really is this, on the back end of what you've been saying there, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the effort that's going into the newsletter now, or whether it's the Twitter engagement, because obviously there's a reflective benefit there. I'm assuming that is the process the same now that it was 12 months ago, 6 months ago? Do you have a set process? Are you constantly refining that process? I know it's about that sort of compounding, and that, you know, that speaks very well to the way that you think as a CFO, and that it's a long-term gain. And, you know, you might not see anything for quite a while, but you'll turn around at some point and go, wow, look what we've built here. And that's the benefit of compounding over time. But have you had to adjust the processes? Because it's a lot of heavy lifting. What you've described, you know, if you're doing that outside of the day job, there's a lot of work in what you're describing there.
Yes, I don't want to downplay the work. For 3 to 6 months, it was overwhelming. I wouldn't say I was headed for burnout, Simon. I was burnt out. And I was getting in worse and worse physical and mental shape by the day. Because I release 52 episodes a year of the podcast. That's 52 authors. That's 52 books. And I don't not read them. A lot of the authors say they go on a podcast and it's clear the person who's interviewing them hasn't read their book. I read every book so I can have an in-depth conversation and so I can write a thread about it. So it was getting to be too much. And I added somewhere in there, I added an Instagram and started posting on a second platform. And then around September, we were on a family trip down to Bellevue. And I remember saying to my wife, I'd received a reasonable raise at work, and said to my wife, I think you should quit your job. It just came out of kind of thin air while I was driving. This tends to happen with me. Like, I'm mulling things and you know, it's going in the back of your mind. And then the answer just spits out. And she looked at me, she's like, well, what are you talking about? And I had just started getting some avenues of monetization on the platforms, sponsors, content sharing, partnerships. I'd started a community Twitter growth course or cohort with a couple friends. So money was starting to come in. And she looked at me and said, what are you talking about? And I said, hey, like, our boys need more support. You're stressed. You don't have enough time. Our relationship suffers a little. I'm dying. Like, this isn't sustainable. And, you know, we're all in the car. This is me, her, and our two boys. And we're having this conversation. And the boys are both like, yeah, we're on side with that. Like, it'd be great to have your help with school and with, you know, life. And she thought about it, and pretty quickly she was like, yeah, you're right. And so she gave notice. She left her job somewhere around, I'd say, the start of November. And the process has exponentially changed. So she has taken a lot off my plate. And now we're on, I don't talk about it as much, but we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. We've crossed 32,000 on LinkedIn. We're around 20,000 on Instagram. So those are actually, they feel small because they're so far behind where we were, Simon. But if you think about timelines, she's gotten to 32,000 in 3 months on LinkedIn. It took me a year to get there on Twitter. She's gotten to 20 on Instagram. It took me 8 months to get there on Twitter. So she's going at a faster rate than we went on those. Whether she hits that 20K a month exponentiality, that's yet to be seen. That's when it will really change, I think, our lives, if she's successful there. But that's changed the game. She's starting on TikTok. When you and I were starting, and I asked if you were recording the video, I said, oh, well, give me a minute. And I went and turned on one of those floodlight things, because she's building out in here a YouTube studio. She's taken the part-time YouTuber Academy. So the game is definitely changing. The podcast will be a podcast and it will be streamed on YouTube. That will be much improved. And something else is happening there, because I'm taking everything I know about building a business, everything I know about marching from point A to point Z over a period of time, and I'm applying that to this. So what does that look like? All of the low value activities that she and I do will be outsourced. We'll bring on a teammate, record the Loom videos, have the SOP documents, and we'll outsource anything administrative. And right now, she's probably, she is an insanely hard worker. She's putting a lot of hours in every day. Most of it's administrative. That will all get outsourced. Then I want her focused on 3 things: podcast growth, newsletter growth, open rates, click-through rates, and YouTube growth. Because those are the 3 things that drive the engine of your eventual monetization. So I want her diving deep into those 3 things and those 3 things only. Everything else is outsourced and she manages it all. So because she wants to be the COO of this business, well, then we need you operating as a COO. We need a team of people who you run. And I'll work with you as I guess I get to be president and CEO. I will work with you to create the vision, create the strategy and the roadmap, and you execute it by building a team around you and then focusing everything on the strategic growth of those 3 properties. And when we do that, the game will change. And I recognize that I have a lot of strengths at what I'm doing, and I still feel, Simon, like I fly too much by the seat of my pants. So I just signed up for Todd Herman's 90-day year program. So I'll be diving deep into that this month. And really, it is a way that we somewhat use at work, very similar to how we do there. But it's the idea of breaking down your year into 4 quarters and saying, that's your year. What am I going to get done in that year? What's my plan? What's my roadmap? Execute, evaluate, plan the next 90 days, and just knock it out. And so when you can do that, you're just really driven and focused. And then I want to implement more forward planning and more backwards review. I take a bit more of a 10-year forward look and then break it down into daily habits and just march. But I don't do as much, okay, well, what am I doing in the next 2 weeks? What went well? What didn't go well? What do I need to cut? And the more I see other people doing that, the more I think, well, if I'm already getting an insane amount of shit done, what if I implement some of these other ideas? Will I get even more done? Will I be even more productive? And more importantly, will I be happier and live a better life? Because none of it matters if we're not happy and we're not enjoying what we're doing. So yes, there are some systems and processes. There are more coming in. It is absolutely evolved because there is a high volume of work being done. And I mean, you talked about it. You don't just send a tweet out. You have a network. You have a group of friends. You engage with their content. They engage with yours. You have to know it resonates with your audience. So you have to do the research. You have to write a good hook, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much that happens behind the scenes more than just writing a thread.
Well, Clint, I really appreciate you explaining some of that to our audience, because quite often people can get burnt out. They can, podcasting, we talk about pod fade. People think it's a great idea to have a podcast, and a couple of episodes in, or 5 or 6 episodes in, you realize the amount of work that goes into this stuff. It's not easy too. And you need processes, and you need people, and you need a bit of expertise, and you need to learn certain things to make it work. But to bring back everything that you've been saying, and I really appreciate you giving us some insight into the mechanics of how that works, and also the sort of next stages of how you're going to transition the business even further. But one of the things that you're clearly passionate about, for anybody who follows you or receives your newsletter, is about this idea about thinking better, thinking clearer in life, probably becoming financially free, and certainly achieving more in life. So where does that passion and drive come from, Clint? Why is that such a strong hook for you?
It's interesting because I actually made the shift in the wording of how I phrase it 2 days ago, and you just highlighted that. The idea is think better, achieve more, be financially free. And why is it those three things? One, financial freedom equals the ability to do what you want, when you want, where you want, how you want, if you even want to do it. And to me, that's the dream life. So the idea that I can pick up, and this is more when the kids are out of the house. So it's just me and my wife. And I can say, hey, why don't we live the next 4 months in Spain? And we can do that. That's the life I want to live. The ability to travel the world at a moment in time, on a moment's notice, is beautiful. So I want that for her. I want that for me. I want complete freedom and no tie downs. So that's number one. The second is, well, how do you get there? You get there by making a lot of money, not spending it all, and investing properly. And so you need to achieve more. How do you make more money? You become more valuable. That's the think better. The better I think, the more skills I acquire, the more knowledge I acquire, the more I put it to use, which again comes to achieve more, because you cannot simply become smart, because that doesn't get you paid. You have to become someone who applies what you learn into real life and turns disparate skills, when combined, into rare skills that other people don't have. Now your value's climbing. Now you can earn more because you can do things that the average person can't. You're a CFO who is reasonably decent at public speaking, at writing, at sharing your knowledge with the world. Those aren't skills that are often seen together. So the more you can improve how you think is going to improve what you can do and achieve, is going to improve what you can earn and how you can grow your wealth, equals total life freedom. That's my recipe.
Sounds like a good recipe to me. And it's great because you have those components, don't you? Whether it's the newsletter, whether it's the public speaking, whether it's the social media engagement and community that you have there, or the newsletter, obviously, that we spoke about. But at this stage, it's like a flywheel effect almost, isn't it? If I could describe it that way. And now, as well as having that flywheel that you just keep adding bits to, and it continues to grow, and that's obvious, it is growing. But you're also upskilling behind the scenes. You're also putting in those next stages of processes to continue to level up, in inverted commas, right? Because many people would be very, very happy with where you've got this whole thing to. And it is incredible when you take a step back and say, yeah, and this guy's pretty much doing this in his spare time. I know that might sound a little bit flippant, but you're doing an awful lot of things as well outside of what we're describing here. So when, is this because you're ultimately designing the dream life of the things that you want to be involved in, and this is how I want to set it up? Is that really where this is going to? And it's back to, I'd probably do it for free anyway. I know that's probably not the right thing to say to a CFO, but I kind of love what I'm doing anyway. But it is a vehicle to get you to a place that you want to be in, right?
You've absolutely 100% nailed it, without a doubt. These are the things that I would do for free, assuming my lifestyle was covered and I didn't need to have more. What would you want to do? These are the things I would want to do. These are the things I'm passionate about. And Simon, you're right. I'm building it in public, in front of people's eyes, while I work a full-time challenging job and raise two awesome little boys and live a family life. So there's no excuses, because to your point, you're seeing it. You're going to see it on YouTube. You're going to see it visually talking to you. You're going to see it in the writing on Twitter, in the newsletter, in the podcast, because I don't outsource things to other people. Yeah, of course, I outsource the editing of the sound production of the podcast, but it's me having the conversation with the author. It's me reading the books, coming up with the questions. Those aren't things I'm outsourcing. Might some of them be at some point? Potentially, but to me, you're nailing the other key thing. My number one passion in life and my top strength is learning. And so all of this is an avenue to allow me to consistently be curious, pick up new skills, pick up new approaches and avenues to life, continue to write about them and share them with the audience in novel ways. And all of that drives the life I want. That's an amazing journey to take because I'm enjoying the path and the end result is going to be astounding. When you combine all of that, it's just an absolute joy to build that flywheel and to be a part of it. The biggest piece of fun is imagine when it is full-time, when it isn't my side hustle or side passion, if you will, side hobby. And it's wake up. This is what we're doing for the next 8 hours. Let's crush it. The energy, the passion, the difference that will make. Because by the time we get there, it'll be a 3, 4, 5 year journey, depending. The first 2 years after will be insane. And I'm so excited for what we're doing in the moment and where it's going to go, Simon.
Yeah, and I think that world that you're obviously building in public, what's the saying? You haven't seen anything yet because you're already building the YouTube studio. You already know exactly what's happening over the next sort of quarter. And I liked what you're saying about that sort of 90-day period. And I talk to a lot of authors, as do you, and a lot of them talk about working in seasons, and they work through various seasons. And it's the same in sort of farming or agriculture. It's the seasons that sort of dictate what you do at certain times. And I think there's something very, very powerful to that sort of, well, this is what I'm going to do over the next 90 days, rather than tracking it on the day-to-day. Because on the day-to-day, you can get very granular. You can get disappointed and overly excited, but actually you need to look at it over a slightly longer period of time to see that real benefit of the work that you're putting in, don't you? It's like growing anything, it takes a bit of time.
Absolutely. One of the favorite sayings I write about a lot on Twitter and I'll talk about a lot on YouTube is the idea of decades over days. And so decades over days serves you in self-development. It serves you in learning your career and most of all in investing. And whether that investing is for your wealth or for yourself. And so what we mean when we say decades over days is the idea that my investments are real estate properties. And real estate is one of the best ways to grow your wealth, but it's not short term. It's not Bitcoin. It's not a meme stock. You're not going to get rich in a year. You're not going to get rich in a month. You're going to grow your wealth over a 20+ year time frame. And so I like to give a simple example to young people is if you buy $10 million of real estate, even if it doesn't cash flow or appreciate, so the tenants just pay the mortgage, that's it. In 25 years, when the mortgage is paid off, assuming it was 20, let's make it a 20-year mortgage. In 20 years, when the mortgage is paid off, your net worth is $10 million. That is thinking in decades, not days. And using leverage. How do I acquire 10 million? How do I acquire 100 million in real estate? And then just be patient. If I can get 100 million in real estate, someday I will be worth $100 million. If it cash flows and it appreciates, maybe I'll be a billionaire. So it's it's that type of thinking and that type of horizon that will change our listeners' lives, whether it's being a content creator, having a podcast, having a YouTube channel, investing for their wealth. Think 10 years out, think 20 years out, and plan where you want to be.
Yeah, and you reminded me, because one of the when we started this global discussion, one of the very first people that I spoke to was a gentleman called Simon Alexander Ong, and he had a book published by Penguin Random House called Energize, and he does an awful lot of speaking on this particular topic. And one of the things he sort of raised with me was this thing about overnight success. Now, he was a finance guy. He was, you know, he got the education, he went and did the finance route, but he knew it wasn't his true passion of where he wanted to end up. And he said, what people don't see is me sneaking out at lunchtime, taking off the stockbroker finance suit, going down the fire escape and going out to a meeting or a convention or doing the thing that I'm really passionate about. And he's kind of transitioned his life to that. But he was making the point that it isn't a short-term success. People see him on the BBC News. They see him on American news channels. They see him every conference in Europe he's pretty much speaking at the moment. And people go, oh, wow, look at his lifestyle. He's jetting off everywhere. He's got this big deal, this big book deal with one of the world's biggest publishers. And he's speaking on this subject. He's motivating people. And he goes, people have no idea what the last 10 years were like, you know?
Exactly.
Because it had to start somewhere. And he was doing the finance job and doing the speaking stuff in the evenings during his lunch hour, whenever he could squeeze it in. And he's, you know, it was a slow burn. It was a compounding route to get to where he wanted to get to, you know? So, yeah, thanks for sharing that, Clint.
And I think most overnight successes have that same path. Years and years of obscurity and effort and learning and drive that result in what other people call an overnight success.
100%.
Or lucky.
Yeah, lucky, yeah. And it's like you're saying about real estate. Obviously, you know far more than I do about the real estate market, but whether it's investing in stocks or shares or investing in real estate or whatever your investment sort of horizon is, if you look at it in the short term, there's huge ups and downs. There's huge, you know, political changes. There's laws and legislations. If you look at it over 10 years or 25 years, in the case of the example you were going, it's very rare that you'll turn around to somebody who owned real estate 25 years ago and it's worth less in 25 years' time than it was 25 years ago. I don't think I've ever met anybody in that scenario unless there's been some kind of major, you know, global disaster. But it's a long-term game, and I think people are waking up to that. You have to make a difference every day, don't you? But ultimately, you need to be tracking against the decades, not the days. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, make the difference daily, but track the results over longer horizons and focus. When we want to be successful, we need to focus on the process. Sure, you need to check in to make sure the process is working and design your check-in periods and make them not short-term, right? I'll give you an easy example of my oldest son. So we have a goal we're setting for him to gain 25 pounds or 20 pounds over the next 6 or 7 months. And we don't want it to necessarily be a total dirty bulk. Like, hey, we want it to be strength. We want you to be big. So it's, how do we do that? All right, you have this many workouts a week. You're working with a physical trainer this many times. You're working with your basketball team this many times, your football team this many times. And you're using MyFitnessPal to track your micros and your macros. You need to take 4,500 calories in a day. So that's all the daily and the weekly. But the results, I'll throw out at them, hey, what's the weight? Where are you at? But really, I'm not concerned in the first week. I'm not concerned in the second week. The 1 month mark, hey, where's the weight at and how's it been averaging? Let's look at the average over the last month. On average, is it moving in the direction you want? What about 2-month mark? What adjustments do we need to make? And we know the strength results and the muscle results, those won't show up for 3 to 6 months. So you need to keep doing those workouts with your trainer. And you can't worry about whether you have biceps or guns, as these young guys probably still like to call them. In the early days, we have to worry in 3 months and 6 months whether you're there. And even then, you're just in the last bit of grade 9. We're focused on getting you where you need to be by grade 11 and 12 so that you can be in a position to make a college team. So what can we do now that is going to get you there in 3 years? And that's a 14-year-old kid who has been hearing since he was 10. Know what you want, understand what it takes, do the work day in, day out. And he's using it in his life to get what he wants, play sports at a good college. This is what I've got to do. I'm going to break it all the way down to what I need to do on a daily basis, but I'm going to focus on grade 12. Where do I need to be by grade 12? I've got 3 years left.
Yeah. And I think that doing the work is important because a lot of people forget that, everybody wants to be, they want the celebrities. You say they want the guns, they want the result. Everybody wants this instant thing, but it takes application, energy, blood, sweat, and tears sometimes. And you have to do the work, right? And you have to do it consistently.
Yes. Yes. You can never let go of the work. And that's the biggest problem. Like, draw the curve, right? You look at it and say the dollars, the following, the job title, that's on our y-axis. On the x-axis is the effort and the work. Like, it's a combination of 3 things: effort, work, and time. And how much effort will it take? How much of the work will it take to get the result you want on the y-axis? And then contrast that with, what are you willing to do? Because if you know what you want, you understand what it takes, you draw your roadmap, and you go to do the work. Before you start the work, ask yourself, now that I know what it takes, you can tell people what it takes to build your community. I can tell them what it takes to build mine. Okay, well, if that's what I want, and now I know what it takes, now the reconciliation happens. Am I willing to do what it takes to achieve that result? If I'm not, generally 2 things: change what you want to tie to the effort you're willing to put out. I'm only willing to give this much effort, and I'll be okay with the result of what that generates. Or I'm going to up my effort to get that result because I said that's what I want. Those are the 2 acceptable answers. Unfortunately, what we often see, Simon, is the third answer. I'm not going to put in the effort, and then I'm going to complain that I didn't get Simon's result, that I didn't get Clint's result. Life's not fair.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think it also speaks to something you mentioned earlier as well. Sometimes you can become so engrossed in trying to get somewhere that it becomes unhealthy. Your physical health suffers, your mental health suffers, and you also need to be also a little bit aware of that, don't you, in this modern busy life that we all lead, to have that self-awareness to say, hang on, this approach, even though what I want still hasn't changed, this approach isn't serving me. So I need to adjust the process here slightly, because it's not a healthy way that I'm going about this. Because, being burnt out on a long-term basis is not a good recipe. So I think that sort of awareness, or sometimes it's about having good people around you that can spot that too, if you're a little bit blindsided to that. But I think that's also important. And people often get, I think, that confused with doing the work. You've still got to do the work, but how you do the work, how you structure that so it's beneficial and it's something that you enjoy doing, that you want to do, rather than something that's just burning you out on a weekly or monthly basis, you know?
And that goes back to, because I've been using that word more and more too, and I used it just when I was recording with a guest a couple of days ago. When we were talking about the workplace, is this idea of seasons. So different seasons in the year, different seasons in your life, and so there may be a season, and it could be 2 to 3 years, where I'm willing to burn the candle at both ends to get to where I want to go. But it's not forever. When I look at, you said you're designing your life, and yeah, I have on my on a piece of paper, and I've tweeted this: what is my ideal day? What does my ideal life look like? There is a lot of white space in that day. That day does not start with get up and start crushing dreams, that unless that dream is walk the dog, get a workout in, have a meditation in the sauna, jump in the ice bath, then start the workday. And that goes back to the freedom, right? I want to have the space where the first 2 hours of my day are health related, then some deep blocks for work, then go for another walk with the dog and my wife, break the fast, have a second deep block. And then after that, it's family time and it's friend time and it's mental recharge, read some books, go to bed. So it's designing things that will allow the maximum white space so that there can be mental and physical health, because those ultimately will be the number 1 and 2 determinants of long-term success. So if I can design the day to have that, great. How do I get there without going too far down the throwing those away? Because that's what we want for our audience. A lot of people will listen to this and say, oh, he's one of these hustle culture bros. I don't think I am. I'm big on meditation. I'm big on family. I'm big on fitness. And I'm big on saying no to all of the bullshit that takes me away from achieving my goals. So a lot of people will say, well, Simon, how do you do what you do if you're doing all this? Clint, how do you do all of these things? I say no to a lot of things. What is my life? My life is with my family, work, and what I'm doing. I don't go to a lot of hangouts. I don't go visit friends for social calls for half the weekend. It's like I work 7 days a week on the things that I'm passionate about. That's how I'm doing it in a way that I don't think I'm burning out, so that I can meditate. I'm working out 6 days a week again. I'm walking my dog almost every day. How do you do all of those things and fit them in a way where you can get what you want without burning out? Because I don't think either of us wants to sell pure hustle culture where we're burning people out, while recognizing there may be short seasons where you're going pretty hard to get the ball rolling, and then you can step back and take a little bit more of a holistic approach, if that makes some sense, Simon.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And I really like what you're saying about building in that all important white space into that sort of calendar. Making sure that there's that appointment with yourself that says, well, in the morning, I'm going for the walk, I'm having the sauna, I'm chatting to friends. It's about building in those things. And I suppose the old cliche is we all have the same 24 hours, right? We all have the same day. And if you can orchestrate it and smart enough, yeah, sure. There are times where it just isn't possible. I was talking to a gentleman only this week who's got a startup. They're raising millions of dollars. It's all hands on deck. It's just absolutely, blisteringly fast. But for somebody who's worked in a startup and worked in a corporate entity where it's very established and been around a long time, they're two different ways of business. And there are certain points in a career where you have to maybe work a little bit harder, a little bit longer, but you also have to then balance that back, because ultimately the scales will balance themselves at some point, one way or the other. And it's best, I found anyway, it's best that you're controlling the scales, and otherwise it will do it itself without you. And there's no point reaching the end and not being in a position to enjoy it, right?
The 100%. And, you started with that cliche saying, and it really jumps out to me. I saw this on LinkedIn the other day, and I've been thinking about it because I've read some books in the last couple of years and had some conversations with female authors. And you start to think about that idea that we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And it's largely inaccurate. And so let's dive into that a little. Because I do always say, hey, you're responsible for your outcome. And I recognize one of the reasons I have the 24 hours in a day that I have is because I have a wife at home who's willing to do what she does to support me having the 24 hours that I have. Because even that period of time where she wasn't doing the work with me on the growth guide, she was owning 100% of the family and home life so that I could work full time and be a creator. So she was supporting the vision in that way, which was why we were both burning out, because she was attempting to both be a mom, take care of the house, and work a full-time job. Like it was too much. And so now it's balanced, but it's balanced because I have a full-time team member. For those people, and we have a fair amount of wealth where we can outsource the podcast production. We can outsource the house cleaning every couple of weeks. So for people who have lower wealth points, for people who don't have that support that does some of the heavy lifting, it's easy generally and often it's older, wealthier, white men like me who will say we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And I definitely recognize there's elements of that are accurate. And it's not at the same time fair it's not 100% accurate. You got to own your shit. You have to take responsibility for what you want in life and the work you're going to do. And if you're in that situation where you don't have that much time, it's what can you do with the time that you do have and using that to its fullest. So for the audience who's listening, they're not just saying, hey, these guys are out of touch, because more and more this is crossing my mind is how to get what you want and succeed at the level you want when you're in that situation, because it's a harder situation to be in.
Yeah, it's not a level playing field. I mean, that's clear.
Yeah.
So, your socioeconomic surroundings, the community that you brought up in, the culture that you belong to, the area on the planet that you're born into, there's an awful lot that you have very little control over when you come into this world, one way or the other. Some people have perceived advantages and disadvantages depending on who they are and where they are. And that's just the way it is. That's the lottery of life, I suppose. But I think the point that you're making, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that you can do what you can do with the playing field that you're on. And it isn't fair. Nobody's saying it's fair. Nobody's saying that people don't have disadvantages. If you have to look after somebody in your family who is not well, if you have to care for a loved one that something happens to, it takes away that ability to do a lot of the things that we are talking about here today. But that's just the way life is. It isn't fair. It isn't. Sometimes people get dealt a really tough hand in life. But hopefully, even if they can take a small piece of maybe some of the content that you're putting out there or some of the advice that you're giving out there, it can benefit people. And I've also come to realize in life, what you determine to be the success isn't necessarily the next person's success. It's different for everybody. what winning looks like is not consistent, you know? So what is, for somebody who publishes their first book, that could be real success. They could be so overjoyed with that. To somebody who decides that they're going to afford themselves time in their life to paint, or to do work in a non-profit area and to support charity type work, or to help people less fortunate than themselves, that might be the success that they want. So there's all different types of success, and people are all on different playing fields. I mean, I think that's a given. But yeah, we certainly don't want to make out as though everybody's coming at it from the same angle. But there's nothing wrong, and this is an important point. I think there is nothing wrong with trying to get ahead, with trying to better your circumstances, because I do believe, and I think you believe in it quite strongly, that if you can sort of conjure up where you want to go and start putting those concrete plans around it and apply yourself towards those plans. I've certainly had enough examples in my life, and you definitely have had enough examples in your life, where those things start to materialize in real life. Yes, there are benefits. Yes, there are fortunate. Yes, luck plays a part in it. But it's very hard to achieve some of those things without putting the planning together, without educating yourself, without putting the work in. It's very rare that it happens otherwise, unless you're really lucky.
And Simon, that was so well said, and I'm aligned with 100% of that. The example I can use that comes easily to me is even myself. And I've talked about this before I started to change my life, to say, well, how will I get shit done? How will I plan? How will I think? How will I change my conscious thinking? How will I change my subconscious thinking? And how will I change my habits and behaviors? So I look at it and I call it my hardware, my software, and my operating systems. So until I learned to change all of those things, I was someone who wasn't achieving high levels of success in any field of my life. Sure, I was doing okay at work. I was growing my career, but I'd hit a level where I was stuck until I fixed my software and I fixed my operating systems. Okay, level up, became a CFO. But I hadn't fixed my hardware. So things were going poorly in the home life. I was making mistakes. Our relationship was headed for an end. And then I fixed the hardware. And all along, because I'd realized the steps, I was fixing the operating systems always. That one never changes. And every time I had a major upgrade in hardware, software, or operating systems, my life changed for the better. From I wasn't wealthy, I wasn't a CFO, I wasn't someone who achieved big things, whether it was physical, mental, career, financial, any of that, until about 32. And then I took the first major step. And then I started to get pretty challenging physical things done. And that taught me, well, how do I take the physical and turn that into career or financial? And if that makes sense to you, and so who I am today at 45, if you look at what's happened over that 13 years, it's insane what we as a couple have achieved financially, career-wise, with our family, and every single facet of my life. Mental. If you talked to me 10 years ago, you wouldn't recognize me as the guy you're talking to today. So when we say you can change your life, we're not saying that flippantly. In 10 years, you can exponentially be a different person than you are today.
100%. Thank you, Clint. I want to squeeze in some more questions, because we could talk all day on this type of stuff. And I want to ask you a few more things as well, and maybe change gear a little bit. So you read a lot of books. You've already mentioned that you read the book of everybody who's on your podcast, so you know exactly what makes them tick, and you can talk in depth about the books that you feature and the authors that you feature. When I ask you about books that you read, is there any that spring to mind that you think they're just so compelling, everybody should read them? Do you have that sort of book list off the top of your head? Or are you listening to audio? Are you picking up physical books? Are you scouring the internet every day for more information? How do you learn as well?
They're all physical, and what I love is as I read, I write the questions in the book for the podcast. And historically, I would write it on paper and then stick the paper in the book. The ones that jump out at me that people definitely should take a look at is number one would be Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Almost any self-help book is somewhat derivative of that book. And so an absolute work of art. The whole idea of begin with the end in mind. Everything you and I are talking about is derivative of begin with the end in mind. Where do I want to get to? That's the end. Let's break it all the way down to what do I need to do every day to get there. So my entire formula is driven from that book. So definitely game changing. For people who have a
sharpen the saw, right?
Sharpen the saw,
sharpen
the saw, right? So, and I know that's missing. And when the dream life is built, there will be multi-week or even 1 month silent retreats where it's like, hey, I've pre-written content for a month. The podcast and the YouTube's been recorded. I'm going to Bali, or I'm going somewhere beautiful, and I'm going to be silent for a month. No devices, no contact, Clint shutting off. And you'll come out of that just so much of a clearer, better, calmer human. So that's definitely Sharpen the Saw is in the plan book, Simon. So that book changes your life if you live it. And that's the key for any of these books that you and I are going to throw out. You have to live it. Number two would be, and this one drove my entire software change. If you're a person who has an active mind, I think someone said a Ram Dass quote to me recently that the mind is a wonderful tool and a horrible master. So for some of us who, whether it's ADHD or just the mind's always talking, 80 to 90% plus, it's negative, and it's negative feedback loops that just keep repeating. Simon says something to me, or my wife says something to me, and I negatively attribute that to something that's not real. So how do you fix that? And the book that did that for me was a book called Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy by Dr. Burns, and based on cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's my number two, because it, again, fundamentally changed my life. And then when I look at that book, I did my research and understood that CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, came from Stoicism. So I started to read up on Stoicism and understand Stoics. And so Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is just a work of art. Love that book. So for people who want to get into Stoicism, I'd check that out. I don't have any single specific book for Buddhism. The book Already Free by Bruce Tift is pretty big. Buddhism and Stoicism are the two philosophies that really drive my life. So books in those areas tend to be big, Simon. And then a book that's pretty beautiful, although the author's getting a little bit crazy, is Resilience by Eric Greitens. It's a very good book. It's one of the most beautifully written nonfiction books I've ever read.
Well, thanks for sharing those. Some great suggestions in that list. And also, I do like the analogy you drew earlier in terms of upgrading your own operating system and your own hardware, and that wasn't lost on me at all. I do like that approach to life, because it's so true, isn't it? There are different factors that you have to look after at different times. So the other question I want to ask you as well is, you're working in these 90-day periods of time, you're focused on the seasons that we've talked about already. But if you look forward then over a year or a couple of years, you're building the YouTube studio, et cetera, et cetera. But what does the future look like for you, in a couple of years' time? What are you hoping to have achieved by then, Clint?
Yeah, let's say 3 or 4 years. So by then, my full-time life is creator. And I write every day. I read, I podcast, YouTube. And Then from a monetization perspective, you look at you'll have grown the newsletter and the podcast to a certain volume. And so those will be driving in steady cash flow. That'll be your consistent, steady cash flow. I will have courses, cohorts, and coaching. So the way I look at that is there will be 2 or 3 areas, but your video course is your entry point. Then you have a cohort system where, hey, it's live classroom over Zoom as an example. And that'll be option 2. And then option 3 is one-to-one coaching. And most of that will be in the area of get shit done. So where do you want to get in your life? Let's get you there. So here's the simple video course that teaches you how I do that. 10 modules. Here's the cohort where you come into a room with 40 other people. We have a community, 100 people. We hold each other accountable. You have accountability partners. We deliver the materials, and then we have a Q&A conversation about it. And we work together over time to get you where you want to go. And then the last one is always, you want to work with me one-on-one because you want the handhold and you want the help with it. Okay, let's look at that. So that'll be built around 2 things. One of them will be getting shit done. The other will be growing your audience. You want to do that. Okay, well, let's look at how to do that. That partially because I just have so much fun doing it that I want to show other people how to do it too. And then there might be something in there about financial freedom and financial literacy as well. I'm a little unsure about that one as much. A lot of my writing will be in that area, and maybe there will be courses, but it's not something I'd want to do one-to-one coaching in per se. Maybe a cohort with a friend. So we're in discussions with that, with a friend who also focuses on that. And so then that's a bit bigger ticket. So you've got the steady income from the podcast and from the newsletter. Then you're generating reasonably steady income from those because you're selling the courses full time. You're doing the cohorts maybe every 2 months, every 3 times a year for each cohort, but you've got 2 or 3 cohorts, so you're almost going every month. And then the coaching, you're coaching maybe, I don't want to coach more than, I'd say, 6 to 8 hours a week. So then still a fair amount of time left goes to private equity and real estate investing. So by the time we're doing this, it's okay, well, I've been in business for 25 years. I've been a CFO for a decade. Okay, I understand operating businesses and I understand real estate. Let's invest in real estate and let's invest in businesses, take some ownership and take everything I learn about how to think better, achieve more, become financially free, and apply that to your leadership team in these businesses and help them become the best leaders they can be and grow the business, make some money. But those are, how do you grow your net worth over the decades while you're getting the cash flow from all these other things? So that to me is where I always thought I'd end up, where I planted the seed when I drew the roadmap in, conceptually, mentally in 2018. And then I put it on paper in 2020 and I started acting on it in 2021. And somewhere in that 2025 to 2027 range, it'll be reality.
Sounds like you're going to have some fun along the way, Clint.
Oh, like I talked about that very business-like, but it's going to be insane fun. Yeah. An absolute. I can't even imagine waking up every day and getting to do that as my day.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, there's only a couple of things I need to squeeze in before we wrap up today. One is there any other area that we haven't maybe touched on or anything that you want to double down on and refocus on before we finish and close out? And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to connect with you and get in touch about all the things we've spoken about, where do you want to send people to watching this?
Yeah, I think we've gone pretty deep and wide. I think for the average person, and we've said it a couple times, this idea, number one, know what I want. Number two, understand what it takes. And I had a guest once use this line, and I'll never forget it, and I use it regularly now, is a crap map is better than no map. So have a plan. Like, figure out what you want, like what you really want. And Simon, so many people say I want X, but then they don't do it. Well, it's because you don't want it. Because you're only going to do something if the pleasure you get from it is high, or the reduction in pain is high. And so the worst spot any of us can be is comfort and complacent. Because when you're comfortable, there's no pain that's driving you to change, and there's no pleasure that's so good that you want it. So you have to consciously create that pleasure of, this is what I want, and I want it so bad, I'm going to get it. Then you draw the roadmap, and then just start doing the work. Like so I just really want to emphasize that for people. It's scary how simple that is. Like, they're like, it's too simple. Well, it works. Now it might be over a long period of time. And so where can you find me? I'm on Twitter at I am Clint Murphy. The website is thegrowth.guide, thegrowth.guide. And that will get you to the podcast, which is The Growth Guide with Clint Murphy, and the newsletter, which is The Growth Guide. And yeah, I answer almost every DM I get on Twitter. If you email me, I respond. So reach out. If what we talked about resonates, reach out. I mean, this is how Simon and I ended up here today. Simon sent a DM and said, hey, would you like to talk? And I was like, yeah, sure. Let's have a convo. So reach out and let me know what you want. Let's talk.
Sounds good. And that's a nice place for us to bring this episode to a close. So thanks to Clint. Thanks to everybody who's watching or listening to the global discussion around the world. Please like, follow, subscribe, do all the things I need you to do to help support this podcast. And I hope that you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers. So thanks, Clint. It's been great to catch up with you again today, my friend.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it.